What has most inspired you and kept you involved with the Occupy Wall Street movement?
What inspired me most was the tactic of outdoor space. But specifically for people of faith and for theology, you go into religion because you want to make some kind of difference and think about theology different. And the tactic and the idea of religion not just being an abstract, not being a coating, thin veneer on business as usual, but actually having commentary on real space and the vectors of power that control real space, an actual incarnationalist theology that mattered and affected why can't I go over there, why can't I go over here. That was so revitalizing for us. It redrew the maps of Manhattan literally for us. And that kind of commentary and that kind of theology was what pulled us in right away, and that's what keeps us with this movement going forward.
Well, sometime, I guess, over a year and a half, 2 years ago, we've had in the Bay Area a number of clergy and activist people who were engaged in low-wage workers, rights, living wage movement, immigration, rights, sexual equality movement. We had a number of people that were meeting weekly and talking about how do we build a justice movement that is necessary in the United States. And so that when Occupy Wall Street happened, that was an immediate attraction that we began to meet with and talk about how do we act in solidarity with the Occupy movement.
To learn to dance in an earthquake. And that's what we need. Maybe we already are. We need to do it. But the fear is indeed the motivating force, I think, for that clench up. And learning to undo that fear, not only in individuals, in a whole society, is really hard. America, somehow, it still surprises me as an historian, even now, that as terrible as the killing of 3,000 people on a single day was, the notion that it has transformed American politics out of fear for at least a decade is still pretty astounding. I'm not astounded by the notion that Jewish politics got transformed by the slaughter of a third of the Jewish people. But it did. It did. Whether we think it's strange or not, it did. How do you undo post-traumatic stress syndrome of an entire culture? How do you heal not just one person's or 20 persons' traumatic stress syndrome, but that of a whole culture? And I think that's one thing the religious traditions, nobody else ain't going to do it. Healing the soul, which is what gets wounded in post-traumatic stress, healing the soul is really up to us. This society has no idea about how to heal the soul.
One way you learn how to dance in an earthquake is to listen to those people who have been dancing all their life. People of color, people who have been oppressed, women, if we would listen.
And so I think that the role that we can play, the most important role, is that of balance with because spirituality and our faiths, at the end of the day, all of that is about creating balance in ourselves. Balance in our lives, balance in our families, balance in our communities. And I think that that's when things turn bad, when those things get out of balance within the movement, whatever, right? And I think the one example that I always go back to, and some people may not like that I say this, but was that beautiful day, gorgeous day in Oakland, where we took over, roughly how many? 30 to 50,000 people take over the port of Oakland, and it's all of the beauty of Oakland. 75,000. Yeah, there you go. As many as it was, we saw that it was huge, and it was one of the most beautiful things, and like you said, one of the most profoundly spiritually moving things I've ever seen in my life. And the level of excitement, and the entire city was talking about it, whether people were there or not, the entire Bay Area. And then to have what happened that evening, where essentially you have a small group of people that make a decision on their own terms without consultation of those 75,000 people, and essentially try to have a photo shoot and take over a building. So in the Islamic faith, we have an idea of istikhara, right? Of where we make a prayer, where we ask God how to move forward, what we should do in our life, whether or not we should make these important decisions, right? And so I think it's that consultation with God and the remembering that we have to be in balance and we have to be in a state of remembrance, or dhikr, right? And what the Sufi tradition would teach us is being in constant remembrance of God.
Want us to begin to talk, expand our language, and not talking so much about faith communities, but spirituality. Because when we talk about faith communities, I think many people see organized religion and then respond in a negative way, particularly young people, to that. So I think we have to, they respond in such a way so that many people, I think the young people in the Occupy movements across the nation, do not see themselves coming from a spiritual base. Yet there's a deep spirituality to what's happening on Wall Street, but they don't recognize it. So I think we can add to their understanding by lifting up the profoundly spiritual nature of anyone who protests injustice. That's a spiritual, that comes from a spiritual base, not from a faith base, but a spiritual. So I think that's very important. I think the Judeo-Christian, particularly my own Christian denomination as a Methodist, that we Christians have to, once and for all time, reject violence. And we can help the Wall Street movement if we Christians would reject violence. And I mean by that from the very root of our religious thinking. How foolish is it to talk about "He died for me" as if good things can come from killing and dying. How essential it is for us to begin to change our whole conversation. And the reason we don't is we still have an attraction for violence. It saved me. And that prevents us from dealing really with what I consider to be the major cause of human pain in the world today, and that's violence. In the last 100 years, violence itself has been the major cause of human suffering and continues to be the major cause of human suffering. And so we Christians have to begin to reject that in our own thinking and theology and preaching and songs and understanding around the issue of violence. We don't want to reject that violence is the way by which the domination system keeps everything together.
We should be that example that is an attempt to bring balance to any space that we're in. And while the majority of people may not themselves be religious, they may not be of faith, and may not or practice spirituality, in my life as a person of deep faith who also has grown up in a very secular generation, I've seen that people are always very profoundly affected by me when they're around me based upon my faith. Or people who may even just have me on Facebook and may have not seen me since high school, and I run into them, will tell me, "You used to be crazy." Like, literally, if you knew me in high school, I was crazy. I was one of these crazy I'm from the suburbs of Denver. That's what we knew how to do, right? Suburban reality, this nihilistic reality of desire and fulfilling your cravings constantly. But then that shift, right? And so if we can be those examples, those prophetic examples, right? And I think the story that as it relates to power, that was coming up to me too when you all were speaking, is the story of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he comes at what they call the Fath of Mecca, right? The opening of Mecca, where after all these years of warfare, Mecca just opens. And he comes into the city riding his donkey, with his chest against the back of the donkey, leaned all the way down. Right? He could have ridden a horse. He could have ridden with his back, high. Even someone was carrying in the staff of the standard, right, the flag, and he told them to lower it, to take it away, to not lead like that, because you had to go in humbly. And then he goes and clears the Kaaba of the idols that have been placed there.
The King James translation says, I am that I am. And I figure that when you're a committee appointed by a king to translate the Bible, you don't want to say, I will be who I will be is the name of the universe. You want, I am what I am, that's the way it is, and don't make trouble. And that's the way they translate it. But the Hebrew is totally clear. It's the future tense. It's the future tense.
Exactly.
And then God says, besides, I got a nickname. And my nickname is, in Hebrew, Yud, He, Wo, He. In the Western alphabet, Y, H, W, H. I suspect a bunch of people here were taught in seminary or graduate school that was Yahweh. But it wasn't. There weren't any vowels. And it wasn't Yahweh and it wasn't Jehovah. And for 2,000 years, the rabbis insisted that you say Adonai, which means Lord. And that's why the Christians here are stuck with Kyrie and Dominos and Lord, dominator, right? Yes. Who needs maybe for 2,000 years ago, I guess it worked, but now. So I found myself one day, too long a story to explain, deciding to try pronouncing what my grandmother, when she taught me Hebrew, said, no, you don't pronounce it. So I tried. So I'll pause, for a minute. Y-H-W-H. No vowels. Try. So what came out for me was, and I said, oh, one of the real names of the real God shouldn't be in Hebrew, or Egyptian, or Arabic, or Coptic, or Russian, or English, or Latin, or Greek, but in all of them. And my second thought was, it's not just human. Every life form on this planet breathes. And none of us breathes in a bubble. We, sitting right here, I wish we could see outside the green faces of God, right? Breathing out what we get to breathe in. And we breathing out what they get to breathe in. So I think the name is the interbreathing of all life. That's certainly a metaphor that in this generation of human history seems a lot better to me. So that is at the heart of it. And when we talk about spirituality, the word spiritus in Latin means breath. You can't talk about spirituality without talking about breathing. And we ain't the only folks who thought about that. Yeah, people do yoga. All sorts of people. No. So I want us to be able to bring that deep sense of what it's all about to the Occupy movement, to the members of our own congregations, most of whom don't have the faintest idea. And many of whom, by the way, have lost their jobs, and some of them in their homes, and many of them feel so ashamed that nobody in the congregation knows about it. Which is one thing we really need to be dealing with. So that's what, and out of that flows nonviolence, for sure. The breath that interbreathes all of us.